are session number 3 of our Managing Your Green Farm Finance series. So we're hearing about pasture-based enterprise tool from Jim Munsch and John Hendrickson today. Next week, we're going to be in this room on Tuesday. We're going to hear from Jason Cavadini and Aaron Pape, and we're going to talk about enterprise selection, budgets, and cash flow. I think it will be a nice complement to today's session and the tool that's going to be introduced. Some of you who've been with us have seen this slide a few times now, but for those who are new, Golden Sands RC&D, we're a nonprofit conservation organization. We've been around for about 50 years. A lot of the work we do is mitigation of invasives and then also agriculture. This event is brought to you by the Managed Grazing team. We do grazing plans, education and outreach events like this, and then technical assistance, all free to the producer. GrassWorks is also kind of co-hosting this event with us. If you don't know about them, they are a fantastic organization that provides education to the grazing community. Check out their calendar of events. They have the Wisconsin School of Grazing. This winter we had the Grazing Conference, and they just post about pasture walks. And they've also got a great mentorship program if you're interested in that. We're working with Nicole, and I don't know if she's on the call, but Nicole, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. Quiet. We'll move on. One thing I wanted to mention is we're going to drop this link into the chat, but there is a folder of resources that we're trying to collect for this series. So if you're in the room today, you can scan this QR code and have access to the folder. I'll be sending it in emails. But essentially, it's just kind of the list of resources to go along with the series. And this is next week's session, but let's switch over to Jim and John, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll get them screen sharing.
John, you want to go ahead?
Oh, well, you're first in our order of operations, right?
I'll go first. Anyway, John and I are a team that has been working on small farm profitability for 15 years, something like that. We started out with vegetable farming, and I'll say a little bit more about that, the whole effort in a minute. But aside from that, we've been raising beef here in Vernon County we started in 1980. So what is that, 45 years? We caught the managed grazing bug in the late 80s, and little by little converted the whole farm to pasture, took out all the row crops. And I'll show you a picture of the farm here in a minute. It's all C&D, slope land, highly erodible. And frankly, the motivation for getting into cattle covered up with grass, which we have done. We've tried everything in the beef industry, and finally the consumer world woke up and decided that grass-fed beef was good for them. And so we've been doing grass-fed beef now for about 12, 15 years. We've direct marketed in partnership with a large CSA here in Vernon County that mainly sells in Madison and Minneapolis and all points in between. We did that for about 10 or 12 years. We've done organic. The best money we've made has been after the grass-fed beef thing came on the scene. So that's our farm. I on the side consult small farms around the subject of management, and not necessarily but financial management. And that's me. John, you want to introduce yourself now, or when you start?
Why don't you? Yeah, I'll just introduce myself when you pass it off to me.
Okay, good deal. So I will do a share, right?
Yep.
And go there. And I take direction easily. So if there's something that I'm doing not in your liking, you yell at me. So um, I think there was a fellow named Armistead who raises Angus cattle. He will notice that these Angus cattle are not the current type of Angus cattle. They were all from mother cows that I bought from one producer in 1979, 78, around in there. And we have kept a very close breeding regimen so that these animals, therefore, just by a piece of luck, finish very, very well on grass. Um, the, uh, the trick, so the motivation for getting into this, I was raised on a hog farm. This is not hog farm country. When we bought this farm in 76, 78, we moved here. Um, it was all in crops on 60-foot strips, contour strips, and we were having horrible erosion. So the primary motivation was to find a production system that would cover the farm up with something that wouldn't erode so bad. In those days, those were the terms we talked about. Nobody talked about sustainable. Nobody talked about soil health. I mean, we knew it was back there, but nobody really talked about it. Now all the talk is around that, and lo and behold, covering the land up with grass is a ecological winner. But the question always was, could you make any money? And the question became a burning question for us during those years where we lost money, and we were way back. It was just all conventional beef. There was, we got certified organic for about 10 years, made a little bit more money. That didn't really pan out too much. And then, I said, the grass-fed thing came along. We made some money before it came along, but that helped a lot. And so the question for a producer is, okay, I want to cover my land up. I'm not afraid of raising animals, and I know a little bit about it. And what I don't know about it, I can learn from my neighbors who are good at it. And one of the things that has been a tremendous help to us is having a posse of people I can call up and say, the back feeder coming out, what do I do? And that was sort of the level of question way back in the beginning. As I said, I was raised on a hog farm. I didn't know much about cattle. So that's us. Now, how do you make money? Well, the top line of all of making money is revenue. And the question about revenue becomes, what are you selling? To whom are you selling it? And what price are you selling it at? The tools we're going to talk about in a minute let you explore, if you're not selling to multiple market possibilities, let you explore what would happen to the finances if you did. The selling what may sound kind of silly. We're raising cattle, we're selling cattle. But cattle can be sold in a tremendous different configuration, starting from selling calves in the fall or in the winter when you might want to wean them. You can sell feeders, which are going into the market after a stocker phase, and probably weigh 800 pounds, something like that, or you can sell them lickety split at any local market, but you're taking market price. If you sell calves, you're taking market price. You can wiggle it a little bit by preconditioning of calves. So you can wiggle it a little bit by getting the right kind of breeding so that the buyers of stockers know that you haven't put all the weight on. You put frame on, and somebody downstream can put weight on what they think is just the cheapest way possible. Or you can sell whole animals finished. You can sell whole animals as locker meat. You can sell whole animals bit by bit as cuts. And if you're small and want to get big, the tool that we're going to talk about a little bit later will allow you to investigate any of those ways of selling. And it's up to you. In other coursework, I could spend a couple hours talking about it, is to whom you sell, because what you sell and to whom you sell allows you to determine a price which is most likely higher than the conventional price would be. The question around that, however, is, do I sell it at a high enough price, which incidentally is determined by the market and nothing else. That's how you determine price. By market, I mean the market on the internet for cuts of meat, and the market on the internet for grass-fed beef. If they Google grass-fed beef and you sell halves, quarters, or wholes, halves, quarters, that's the price. And then the question is, can you produce for a low enough price, a low enough cost to make money at any of those activities? The tool will allow you to, that we're going to talk about, allows you to make an analysis, a financial analysis of that. Knowing costs, so revenue minus cost equals profit. Knowing and managing the cost of feed is paramount. Third checkpoint down there, feed is 60 to 70% of your total cost, unless you're a very bad manager of overheads. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. And the management of feed is the cost of each feed type and the cost of the total feed ration. If you're all grass-fed, that may sound simple. It's just your pasture. Well, that's not that simple. And this is, I'm not going to get into it, but you can enhance the quality and the volume and the yield of a pasture simply by management. And if you use other types of feed, corn silage is a very favorite feed here in Wisconsin, or hay or grain, if you're not all pasture. A little trick is that if you know how to graze and are good at grazing, that should be your base feed. And by that, I mean, you start there and you add on top, depending on the performance that you're trying to get. Another cost is the land use, enough so that it fits the business aspirations you have. I don't know how many times somebody will come to me and say, I just bought 15 or 20 acres. I want to retire and make all my extra money selling beef. And when you start doing the numbers and tell them that that they may be, if they keep a herd all year long, they may be able to sell maybe 10 or so calves. And here's how much money you make, and that's how much land you use. And then, is that what you were after? Well, no. And then you got to go back and look at another model. And this tool we're going to talk about is the reason we made the tool, is to allow people to do exactly that. And then finally, understanding and managing non-feed costs. If you talk to an extension person about overhead, they will roll their eyes and say it's all over the map. And it is true. If you take all of the data that resides in the University of Minnesota FinBin, which at the numbers I look at for cow-calf includes about 600 farms. Feed is a somewhat variable from farm to farm to farm if you array them in profitability. Managing non-feed cost is cowboy land. It's all over the place. And so this is another place to be very, very clever. This tool allows you to sort of estimate it, but to really manage it And to manage all these costs, we have at the University of Wisconsin a tool called Livestock Compass, and John will touch on that briefly. And then you've got to look at investment. The main categories of investment are cattle, infrastructure, which includes fencing, water lines, if you're silly, lanes, and any equipment. The most profitable farms that I've had the luxury of getting on have really borne in on that last item, equipment. The most profitable rents equipment only when he needs it or has custom operators do jobs that require heavy equipment. And well, I could go on with these types of, I mean, there's a guy that raises 8,000 stockers in Crawford and Vernon County, and his equipment consists of a small tractor to do a little mowing, 5 horses, 4 quarter collies, and a trailer to take the horses around in. So those 3 things are what can make you profit or not. You're going to talk to Paul Dittman at some point, and he will rub your nose in all of these things to quantify them. The tool we have is a rough estimator of all of these, and rough means if you're clever about inputs, it will be fairly accurate. But if you're not, it will still give you a rough idea if you're kicking the tires on getting into this business. So back to revenue, knowing what goes on in the market is just paramount. And you could say, well, I'm going to be in the grass fed, I'm going to raise all my animals myself. But knowing this market allows you to take profit opportunities when they exist. This is a graph. Blue line is 500 to 600 pound steers on the market at a sales barns in Iowa. And I'm very close to Iowa. That's where we sell our cattle if we sell feeders. The yellow or the orange is cattle that would be going into a feedlot if you're so inclined. And the gray line is finished cattle. As I said, you have to, if you know this, and it's easy to get the data off the internet, USDA AMS will give you this data. And it's important to know it because lo and behold, here's the current price of those lines. And so guess what? Folks like me can make as much money selling calves as we can if we finish and sell not to direct market, but sell on the market. Knowing the difference between the stages on your own farm, therefore the cost of gain between these stages will allow you to make a decision of, for instance, I will buy feeders and finish them because I'm very good at finishing. I've got roughly $170 to play with. Can I take an animal from 800 pounds to finish for $170? Right now, that's unlikely, but it might not be if you can hit it, if you have very low land cost and you know how to graze. So knowing these markets are important to the revenue line. Total feed management, you have to know the nutrient requirements of the animal and the performance that you desire out of those animals versus those nutrient requirements. And there's plenty of stuff in the internet of this kind of data from mainly from universities. Use Pasture as a base load. I've covered that before. Measure and manage your yield, your quality, and the cost of your pasture so that you can manage them. get a pasture and nutrient analysis. They're $10 at the UW lab. Scissors cut. That's what you look for in their price sheet. And maximize practice on pasture. I heard somebody say that he has cattle on pasture right now. That probably is stockpiled pasture, and that's the cheapest feed you can get into an animal if the quality of the feed measured by pasture nutrient analysis is good enough to sustain the animal at the production level you're after. For sure, we in Wisconsin tend to do a bad job on this with cow calf. We overfeed our cow calf herd in Wisconsin. The love of corn silage is part of that, but during that second trimester on these cows, pregnant cows, they can almost exist on straw with a little protein supplement. That's what I'm talking about, matching nutrient requirements to the feed you put in them and make sure that the feed is the lowest cost feed to meet the nutrient requirements. Measure your harvested forage as well. That's a $16 bill at the UW lab, so that you know if you're giving them enough to sustain them. Cover crop grazing is something new, and it's a huge benefit to cost, and it is high quality, or can be high quality, if you can get it established. One of the problems we have in Wisconsin is that there's very little time between harvest of our grain crops and the time when frost would inhibit us from putting in a cover crop. But if you can do that, that's the very low cost of feed. And then grazing crop residue for cows. So this tool we made is actually a remake of a tool that was made maybe 10, 12 years ago for the Pasture project up in the left-hand corner here. Pasture project is a Wallace Center activity, and they have been very active in Wisconsin off and on. And they needed a tool like this, not only in Wisconsin, but further. So one was made, spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, which was clumsy, very approximate, and needed some fixing up. So Grassland 2.0 coughed up some of their grant and hired John and me to fix it up. And John works for CIAS, the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems. And I've been on the board until they got tired of me, and no longer. So this tool looks at all these pieces of the production model of beef. So it looks at cow calf. It looks either connected to cow calf or separate from cow calf, stocker enterprises. And it finally looks at finishing those animals, either your own animals or purchased feeders. And the modeling sheet, which I don't have up here, you'll see it when we go through the tool, allows you to figure out if you have an animal that is finished, what does it cost to process it, and what is your final profitability if you sell it either as cuts. Obviously, if you sell it as freezer meat, all you need to know is the cost of getting the animal finished and hung. So that's the tool, and John is going to take over the driving from here on. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Jim. So Jim provided a little bit of an intro to our tool and the work that he and I have been doing. So I'm the other half of the Jim and John partnership that's been going. Jim, I think you said 15 years. I think it's more than that.
Yeah.
I think we've been working together even longer.
You get old, time goes quick.
So yeah, I'm a farm viability specialist at the University of Wisconsin and have learned a ton by working with Jim because I have a more of a biology background, and Jim has a business finance background. So it's been a learning experience for me working with Jim to develop these tools. And we have a whole set of these tools that we call compass tools. Jim briefly mentioned this one for vegetables that we started with called Veggie Compass. Veggie Compass is a tool that allows you to look at the profitability of each vegetable on your farm and all the different markets that you sell in. And after we produced that, we pretty quickly got requests for a livestock compass. So livestock compass was built with diversified meat producers in mind. So if you are a multi-species operation grazing more than just cattle and are really looking to delve deep into the profitability of your different enterprises, I would encourage you to check out Livestock Compass. We also have a fruit and nut compass for perennial crops, perennial fruits and nuts. We have a O-grain compass, which was built to look at the transition from conventional to organic grain production. We have a couple of really specialized tools that are a little bit different than our other tools. These two down here, the heifer grazing compass and the beef grazing compass. These are partial budget tools that just look at the cost savings of grazing your animals during the grazing season compared to other production systems. But if you're interested in doing custom grazing, you might want to check out those tools. The tool we're going to talk about today is this pasture-based beef enterprise calculator, which is our latest tool. And it's a free download from our website. Quick question that I'd love to ask if folks can either chime in the chat or raise their hands in the room there. The fact that this is an Excel-based spreadsheet, I'm wondering if that's an obstacle for people, because I know some people don't have access to Excel and have transitioned over to using Google Sheets or other types of spreadsheet programs. Is Excel an obstacle for anyone in the room?
I don't. Say on Google Sheets just because of the cost, but I do currently have Excel. I don't know how long I'll keep it.
Okay. This spreadsheet probably would open and function in Google Sheets, but I have not endeavored to do that. We just finished producing this in January, and I haven't had a chance to open it up in Google Sheets to see if it's fully functional. Anyway, there's a very short little questionnaire that we want you to fill out before you download. And that's just because, you know, we have to justify our existence. And so we need to keep track of how many times it's being downloaded and who it's being used by. And so we want to know if you're a farmer or a service provider or what have you. We'd like to know where you're located in the United States or if you're in another country. We do ask for an email address. We're not in the business of sending emails, so don't be worried. I don't have time to send emails, so you won't hear from me unless we come out with a new version of this tool. And that's the only reason that we ask for your email address, because we do improve and change these tools over time. We do also occasionally find errors. And so we need to make sure that we can get the word out about new versions. And then we have both a PC and a Macintosh version of the tool, and then you can just easily download it. When you open up the tool, all of our tools start with a user guide. This is enlarged so that hopefully, I don't know what your situation is there in the room and how well this is readable to folks in the room, but the first page is a user guide. It is formatted so that you can print it out, or you can just refer to it within the tool. There are hyperlinks back and forth to the different pages of the tool and back to this user guide to try to make it as user-friendly as possible. I think that is all I was going to say about this. Now, Jim, I'm going to pass it back to Jim, and Jim is going to talk us through this tool, and I'm going to navigate so that he can focus on the words and I can navigate around. Jim?
What's on the screen is still that entry, the entry document.
Oh, I thought I had shared my entire screen, and so that when I switched to something different, it would show. My apologies. So our user guide that I was referencing looks like this. And we're going to start with the cow-calf page.
Yep. So the user guide ties to every page and walks you through the steps that are shown, step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. This is the structure of this tool is that the cow-calf page, the stocker page, the finishing page, and the meat page are all done per head. And this is how the original tool with Pasture project was designed. And it's pretty typical of other types of these tools that universities have come up with. Ours is better, but similar. So you start out knowing the attributes of your herd, characteristics, or imagine what those characteristics could be. Like a Galloway and an Angus. I'm sorry for the Galloway razor, but you know they're pretty much in the same category. The smaller belt, low line Angus might be different. Certainly a Continental breed would be different. Hereford might be different as to average weight of the cow in the herd. And all of you who have been in the grass-fed business know that there is an advantage to a smaller frame size. I just use sort of an average of what my herd is. And what we've got here is when you see this page to begin with, there is an example column and your value column. If you are in the business, your value is largely informed by your cattle and what you've observed. So this is just Texas A&M calculation algorithms here. So a 1,200-pound animal typically would consume 3% of its body weight per day. You put that in. The call rate on your herd, I put 15. The example says 20. Just from your experience, if this is the steady state call rate, what is your weaning rate? That's the number of live calves that you wean out of the herd. What are the typical weight of those cows or those calves? And what price do you get for the culls that would be represented by the 15, 20%? So I put in, actually, I got a quote from the co-op the other day. They're a little bit higher than $1 a pound live weight, so I just put that in for giggles. The second step is the cost of the feed when the animals are on pasture. Now, this is a little bit, where do you get this type of a thing? If you have done a pasture balance with an NRCS or RC&D pasture planner, they will have calculated for your farm, your soils, dry matter availability at the rate of moving cattle that you are comfortable with. The 4 is to push you to move more frequently. If you are down at moving them every week or so, that 4 isn't going to be 4, it's going to be 3. And there is either in the instruction or the user guide, there is a link to an app for Wisconsin only, and Wisconsin, yeah, there you go. Depending on location, soil type, fertility, etc., so that you can do your own prediction of what your farm with your soils are if you have not had an NRCS or County Land and Water or an extension person do that for you. Cost per acre of pasture. This does not show up in FinBin because FinPack doesn't require the user to calculate that. It's a really simple calculation. Every time you write a check that has anything to do with pasture, you record it. If they still had cigar boxes, you could put the receipts in a cigar box. But this is easy to do on a piece of paper. It's really easy to do if you have an accounting system.
Jim, I'm gonna interrupt you just really quick. Jim has used a couple acronyms, FinBin and FinPack.
Yeah.
Those are acronyms from a program at the University of Minnesota, the Center for Farm Financial Management. They work with producers to collect financial data, and it gets entered into a system that's called FinPack. And if all the numbers are in and they make sense, they get deposited into a database called FinBin. And FinBin is an accessible source of information where you can look up average yields for corn or average costs per acre of corn, average cost on a dairy farm. And so when Jim is referencing those acronyms as a source of information on costs or price, that's what he's referring to.
Yep. Sorry, I should have given you that background. So the other thing that is an input on pasture, as we know, is what the residual is. Adam Abel is pretty strong of the opinion that that should be approaching 50%. And the reason he's strong on it is because anecdotally, some of the more advanced grazers who actually measure this with instruments say that they can beat the predictions that come out of this program I'm talking about, that it can actually be better. And it makes sense. You leave more of the plant and it's going to grow back faster because it has more solar panels up. So anyway, whatever you are accustomed to on your farm, that's the residual. All of these numbers input tell you how much the cost of a consumed ton of dry matter is of your herd. Now, any of you that have been around grazing a long time will recognize that animal unit months, animal unit days, or simply animal units is sort of a surrogate, or no, is another way of measuring yield and consumption. Okay, that's pasture. That gives you the yield per acre that you put in, but also the cost per ton of dry matter consumed. Then there is the step 3 looks at all of the other feed sources that you can have, and it starts with harvested forage, and this is starts with measured tons per acre, which is easy to measure for most farmers. It's the number of bales that you make. It's whether they're high moisture or 15% moisture, and the percentage of moisture will give you the dry matter from that at the field, and then you put in what your estimate is of storage and feeding waste And a little tutorial on that is easy to, if you just Google feeding waste or storage waste, there's a gazillion university produced estimates of that by virtue of different storage and feeding methods. 15% for that, by the way, or 20% for that, by the way, is low on the low side. That's 10% of each. And depending on, you know, your storage method and your feeding method, I have a heck of a time getting down to 20%. Cost of harvested forage then is how much you estimate is the cost of you making harvested forage on your farm. And then all of those are inputs to a ton of dry matter consumed by the animal. Similarly, harvested forage purchased from others, you don't have to, you know right off the bat what you're paying per ton of as fed forage. You maybe know the percent moisture for dry hay. If you don't want it smoky, it's probably less than 15%. And the cost per ton purchased, this is what you would actually pay for the tonnage. And then again, a storage and feeding waste factor, which now allows you to calculate the cost per ton of dry matter consumed. Incidentally, this is an infrequent calculation. You don't hear people talking about this, and certainly this data set that I told you about does not account for the loss of feed. And the loss of feed can be substantial. You can see it right here. If you bought it for $147 per ton of dry matter, you lost 20%. You've lost the difference between 147 and 184. Okay, cover crop grazing. The theory of cover crop grazing, or the algorithm, is that you are not paying as an animal consumes cover crop or crop residue. You are not paying for the cost of raising the row or the cover crop, or obviously not the row crop residue. That is part of the expense that you would have even if you didn't graze it. So all we're putting on this cattle operation is the out-of-pocket cost to graze those two feed sources. The estimate of how much dry matter is available on one or two grazings can go all over the map. It might be a couple of dry matter tons per acre, but you'd have to kind of study that yourself. And so we arrive at a cost of dry matter consumed of those two feed sources. Supplements are salt, mineral on a per head per day basis, and then any other feeds. You know, there was a time when the grass-fed guys were feeding vinegar, they were feeding the molasses. We did it a couple of years, and that again is on a dollars per head, and then we ask for the days because it may not be year round, or for the duration. Days on pasture is your estimate of how long you can keep them on pasture. Days on cover crop, again, your estimate. And the residual of the 365 days we're talking about with the cow-calf operation is 160. And then we ask for the proportion of feed grown on your farm. And then obviously the residual is purchased. And this can vary all over the map. And I've seen farms where it's 100% and 0%, and I've seen farms where it's 0% and 100%. So it's just how you manage your farm. So this then is a rack up in the cost, the feed cost calculation is a rack up of the cost in dollars, dollars per head, during the time when they were on that feed source, and go down, down, down. I don't have to explain all those things. And then non-feed cost. So if you look at this data set we're talking about of these 800 farms, depending on the year, that usually is about, they say 40%. And that is kind of, Oklahoma State University common thought. But as I said before, it can vary all over the map. So out to the side, we have allowed a calculator for you to put in what your experience tells you. If you have no experience, I suggest you just use the 40%. And if I had not done this calculation, it would have been 40%. That's how the sheet was made. But if you have some quarrels with all of these categories and what makes up the 40% on that database, you can change any of them that you want. And that's what I did here as an example. And it lowered it to 37%. And each farm is different. And so you would have to do it for your farm if you wanted to change the 40%. Okay. And then you just pick that.
Let me just interrupt Jim again.
Yeah.
So this percentage over here defaults to 40 unless you just put your own numbers in over here.
Yep.
And if it puts your own numbers in here, then it picks up that other number.
Okay, so now we're down to the juice from all the squeeze, cost per cow, and then adjusted for replacements and culls. That is done in the math, and it's therefore based on the numbers that you put in for how many, what is your cull rate, and what level of replacements you would need in a steady state cow herd. And we'll show you how that can change in a later sheet. So if you're building your herd or reducing your herd, that is not going to be that number totally. You've got another number to deal with. But if it's a steady state, that's the cost of adjusted for replacements and culls, cost of calf after adjusted for weaning rate. So fewer calves, the fewer calves you have, the bigger that number, the percentage. Cost per pound of calf produced is right there. So that's the golden number to know if you can sell that calf for more than that. One thing that's in the user guide is that there is no land cost calculated in that number. And if you rent land, this return per acre is just the number money out of which you have to rent the land. If you don't rent land, it is money out of which you have to pay the taxes on the land. That's a big deal, but it is explained in the user guide. But here's how much land it would take per calf to produce that calf. Pasture acres of 1.7 based on all of the inputs above, and acres to the cover crop, half an acre. And if you raised your own harvested forage at the percentage of use that you designated above, you'd need 1.1 acres of harvested forage at the rates that you put in above. And then this animal may be sold, or may simply stay on your farm and be sold as an older animal with more pounds put on it. If you would sell it, there is a market price that is input there, and you can answer the question is, if I sold this calf, how much money could I make? And that's the calculation you see at the bottom of this. It's the gross margin and then gross margin per acre in this phase. Okay? So I will pause. If there's any burning questions, feel free to put them in the chat or scream them out. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions?
We can
What
answer
kind of-
questions after.
What kind of market do you guys usually shoot for?
What kind of what?
What kind of gross margin number do you typically shoot for, or if it's not to that number, you say that there's too much cost in the enterprise?
It really boils down to the gross margin you want per acre. And you know, Jason Cavadini, who's going to talk to you next time, and I were chatting about that very issue. He can rent his land he's got flat land, no issues, very small issues with erosion. He can rent his land for about $225 an acre. He wants to make double that on his farm. He could. It is very unlikely that he could make it if he only had a cow-calf operation. And so, and we'll see this later, he has a direct marketing operation, and it allows him to make twice that per acre on the whole operation. And this tool allows you to look at that option, taking this animal through a stocker in a finishing phase and as a direct sale. So I don't, you know, the goal should be, well, there's a grazer that is involved in this with, he custom grazes heifers, dairy heifers. And he had a certain mortgage payment that he had to cover. And so his answer to your question was, I need enough per acre across the acres I have on my farm to pay for my mortgage. And it was pretty high. And he's figured out a way to do it.
So that is the cow-calf page. The rest of our pages, or the next couple pages, we hopefully can go through a little bit quicker because they mirror the first page.
So on the second page, the stocker page, you may have a stocker phase that you consider. My stocker phase is from wean until I take them over to a pasture I rent for finishing. But you may not recognize a stocker phase. And so the tool allows you to skip the stocker phase, but we've included it here. There, you can either buy stockers or calves to finish as stockers, purchased, and the sheet will show you just those options. Or you can say that it was farm raised coming into this phase. And I've done some of the numbers that I've filled in for this example are numbers from the way we raise cattle here. We wean in December, January, and we go out to pasture first week of May, and they go to another pasture. So it's very nice for me to know what I'm making money on in that phase. So anyway, on the case of farm raised, the $1.35 cost comes from the cow-calf page, and it comes across as cost because you haven't sold anything yet. and the weight comes across from the cow-calf page, because that's what you put in over there.
While I have the floor, if you don't have a cow-calf page or don't have a cow-calf operation on your farm, you can skip that first page and jump right to, maybe you buy stockers. And so this tool is very flexible in terms of what aspect of the beef industry you're engaged in. And I'd also want to mention that if you have a cow-calf operation, and so you do have some farm-raised calves, but you also are buying some calves, the tool allows for that. You would select farm-raised here if you have any farm-raised calves, and there's a place later in the tool for you to indicate that you're also buying calves or buying stockers.
Okay, so and that's very important, because the more different models you can use, the more flexibility you have, and the more risk management you build into this system. And for instance, I know of a couple of farms here that are fairly big into grass-fed, and they've gotten to the point where they're selling so many finished animals, and they either, in the case of one fellow over here, he said, I don't want to be in the cow-calf business. I'd rather buy my calves from somebody I know in the neighborhood who does a really good job of raising feeder calves, or 550-pound animals. I'd rather buy them from them and use my pasture to finish, because I'm good at finishing, and because I've got the market for finished animals. This tool would have allowed him to make a calculation of one versus the other. And another fellow I know does both, for resilience and for risk management. So that's the reason this is a little bit more complicated than the tool that Pasture Project made, because they were looking at grass-fed from cow-calf to finish only, period. This allows some flexibility, which is a reflection of reality of people who are making some money in this business. Okay, anyway, stocker, the variables are, again, what your finished goal weight of this phase is, the goal that you have, what your average daily gain will be, and therefore it calculates the number of days that are going to be in this phase. Again, dry matter, we don't have any issue of culls, and so the next sections from step 3 down through 4 are exactly equivalent to what I took you through in what I subjected you to in the cow-calf thing, all the way down. Again, the overhead is, if you want to calculate your own, you can. And yep, there we go. And I didn't put anything in there, so this is default 35%. Total cost of gain. If you think back to the graph that I showed you of the price of calves versus the price of a feeder calf, that is a calf that's ready to go into a finishing phase on somebody else's farm. The total cost of gain is a crucial piece of information that lets you decide whether you want to sell the calf or whether you want to sell a feeder. And if you then divide it by the number of days, and we have not done that in this sheet, you divide that by the number of days, that is, I'm sorry, the number of pounds gained, that is your cost of gain. If you know your cost of gain, you can make decisions like the one I talked about. Cost per pound of stocker with the cost of gain plus the calf turns out to be $943. or $1.26 a pound. Cost. This has nothing to do with, because this is a farm-raised calf example. And again, we calculate acres, and this accumulates the acres from the cow-calf page and the stocker phase, and shows that in the acres per head case. Again, if you want to sell that animal, the current price for those is about $2.80. I used an average looking backwards of $1.80, which over the cattle cycle is about right. And then, but if you sold it, you would be paying, you would have to take out shrink and commission. And this depends on where you're selling. If you're selling to equity or through equity, and you're trucking there, and it's an overnight stand or even the same day trip, you're going to get some shrinkage. I mean, shrinkage alone can be 2-3%, maybe more if the trip is a long trip and they stand overnight. So you're just going to have to kind of learn as you go on shrink and commission. Commission is obvious; they'll tell you what you're going to pay for commission. So the total revenue per animal less the cost is the gross margin. And if you had kept this animal from birth through the end of the stocker phase, and this could then go into a feedlot, you would have made $314 per acre on this animal. Okay, finishing. This is magnify it up, is very similar, except in this phase, we accommodate the fact that certain people may not recognize a stocker phase. And so it's calf raised on, farm raised calf. And that would take this initial entry back to that cow calf page. Or if you had a stocker phase, farm raised stocker, or if you had purchased a 750-pound animal or thereabouts, that's the purchase phase. I elected farm raised stocker to fill in an example. And by the way, as you change the input up above, the examples change where it's necessary. So if you purchased there, you'd have to do a new input for what you paid for them and what weight they came across at. So going back to farm raised, the initial step 2 is very similar to what we just did. How many pounds per day you're going to try to get? What is the feed intake? And then cost of pasture, cost of feed, all the different types of feed adds up to a cost for each of those feed sources, put an overhead on it, and then there's your total cost of gain. And I want you to notice that between the numbers I put in and the example is some serious, I mean, for one animal, it doesn't sound serious, but if you had 100 animals, it's serious. And it is simply by increasing the rate of gain a little bit through maybe some supplementation, maybe a higher nutrient grazing sward, maybe moving them every 12 hours. And a lot of the finishers around here do exactly that. And so your cost per pound, you saved it about a dime. Land requirements, again, are accumulated if they have all been raised on the farm. If not, it's only this phase that shows acres. Dressing percent is whatever your experience is. A lot of grass-fed has a fairly low dressing rate. A, a, a grain-fed feedlot animal can be 50, 60%. Hot carcass weight, this is coming from the finished weight that you have designated above, and this dressing percentage. And price per pound of hot carcass weight is an accumulation, as is the total cost, accumulation of all the other phases versus the amount of meat that you end up with it as a hot carcass. And then total revenue per head. Now, on revenue per head, it goes back to this price per pound. And the price per pound, there's two numbers here. $4 is what a lot of locker meat people are selling beef at right now. That $4. And I say that my grandson back here wants to hoop up the direct marketing thing, and I did a little market study for him in Western Wisconsin. All of them are around $4 a pound right now. If I sold to the grass-fed beef co-op, it would be $3.10, and that's what I put in there. And so there you go. If you do the due diligence of doing the locker meat, you're going to make some more money. And if you later, we'll see that if you sell by the cut, you can make even more money. But anyway, total revenue per head is simply that price times the carcass weight. I'm sorry. Yeah, revenue per head. And then post-finishing transportation, if you're selling meat, or I'm sorry, if you're getting it down to the locker plant, that's what we're talking about. And then gross margin per head is the difference between total cost and revenue. And here's dollars per acre, accumulated acres across all of those phases, or any phase that you worked in. So those are the three phases. But now we have, if you sold direct, you would pick up the cost of from that finishing phase, bring it over here to the cost of finished animal from the finishing phase, add in some transportation from your farm to the locker plant, total cost pre-slaughter. The live weight comes from the finishing page. Dressing ratio, I used a different ratio than on the other page. I don't know why, but 55%. The hot carcass weight then would be 660. That's an important number. And if you've had cattle finished, that's that's the number that, or the value that your processor uses to bill you. Ratio of sellable meat to hot carcass weight depends on how it's cut. If you're not schooled in this already, talk to your processor. He can school you up. And hamburger, however much hamburger you're going to sell, is a function of how you cut the animal, how much of it you grind up. Slaughter is the way that most processors charge. Is 3 pieces: slaughter, cut and wrap, grinding. Maybe an ad, or it may not. The Solar Meats down here, well, you guys don't know these companies, but there's one of them down here that charges $1.07 cut and wrap, but that includes any grinding you have done. And then another one right down here by Viroqua charges 97 cents, I think it is, and then they charge a nickel for grinding or something like that. Anyway, no, 10 cents. Anyway, that's getting it processed, but there is work and expense involved in marketing and sales activity, involved in storage if you are not immediately shipping everything out. and there is a way to do that, but it's not very frequent. And retail beef transport, that's transporting it out of a cold storage facility, which may be your own, by the way, to a customer, a buying customer. And then target sales price per pound. Again, you get out on the internet, you find people, and by the way, the fellow, what's his name, Pape, I think, who's coming, does this. Ask him what he charges on average. A hint, I put $8.50 in there. A little hint, the retail box beef cutout price for conventional meat is very close to $8 right now. And okay, so anyway, that down at the bottom, gross margin is calculated both in total and, or I'm sorry, total for one animal and per acre that it took to raise that animal from calf on. Okay, so those four are all per animal, per head. But that's not how we raise cattle. So we now have something called a 5-year cattle plan, which allows you, if you're in the cow-calf business, to do step one. Let's say that you start out with, in year 2025, put that year in, that you purchased 6 bred animals that were going to calf this year, and that you had 10 animals that are going to calf this year, and you had already sold off the calves from those animals. So in the year, you've got 16 animals that will calve in 2025, and you'll sell some culls. This is the 3% is whatever cull rate you put in on the cow-calf page. And so you're going to have calves on the farm after the weaning percent is taken into account. These are born and weaned calves. So that goes across all 5 years if you're building your herd. And then if you decide to use a bull, you put in a bull, and then out in 2 years later, when you don't want the bull to breed its calves, you have to sell that bull and buy a new one. So that's how you do the cow-calf pay, or the herd expansion numbers. If on line 8 you want to buy heifers instead of bred cows, we allow you to put that in there. And what it'll do is show a calf up, not in the year that you buy it, but the next year. And down below, you can, in step 2, we now take the 14 animals that are born on the farm, and you put in the disposition of those animals. Replacement heifers are automatic because of the cull rate. Replacement heifer calves, to expand, you might want to keep 5 heifers. One little thing that's goofy about the numbers I put in, that's 8 animals, and we only had 14 to start. So you had more heifers than you ordinarily would put in. But anyway, that's just a quick add of these numbers. Calves carried to the next year for finishing would be 6. And down in the bottom, we have something called a check. If you would go crazy and put in 15 replacement heifers, that would say, can't do that. That has to be 0. That's the check column. Okay, so each of those years, you've got calves up in line 13 that you have to say where are those calves going to go. And that's what this is all about. Down below, you could sell some of those as stockers, or you could retain them as feeders for sale in the next year. So that is the disposition by feeders. I mean that they would then be available the following year for sale. If you wanted to purchase either feeders or stockers, the step 3 is where you accommodate that. Okay, so down below, then at the very end, step 5, you've got finished animals sold by sales channel, and for purposes of this, we've got 3 channels. One, because it reflects a different pricing and maybe a different cost. Direct to consumer as meat. That means literally meat, not a carcass. Direct to consumer on a carcass basis. They then turn it into meat with their money. And branded program, which is Thousand Islands. It's Wisconsin Grass-Fed Beef Co-op. That's a branded program. And there are 5 or 6 others, and somebody else can tell you about those. I know them, but I'm not going to tell you. Land, and then on the bottom is the land requirement to support the animals that you have added in the top part of this sheet. And this is really important for somebody expanding to know, do I have enough land available to be able to accommodate that expansion? So that's this page. And then the final page is a 5-year profit and cash flow calculation. All of the numbers that are shaded in green have come from other parts of these sheets, reflecting the per head cost times the number of each class of animals reflected on the sheet we just filled out. You have to add some numbers in the column marked C, the $4, the $2. $4 is finished animals sold to consumers as meat. You should put that in. It is not endemic to the finishing page. So you have to put that in. And bulls sold is, if you sold them on a per pound, well, you would sell them on a per pound basis, probably. And if you don't, if you sell them for a dollar amount, just calculate the per pound that you sold it at, put that in. And then down below is if you purchased a bull, probably purchased it dollars per head. And if you purchased cows, bred cows or heifers, you probably purchased those so much per head. So if you now slide down in the page, there is some, if you were purchasing feeders for finishing in the following year, you put them in there. If you were purchasing feeders for finishing this year, you would put it there. And this is what John was referring to when he said you could do both. So the sheet allows you to have all farm raised animals, or you could purchase animals to go through the finishing phase or a stocker phase. Stocker phase would be for finishing next year, and a finishing phase would be finishing this year. So on the final page, cash from operations is simply a rack up of all of the costs reflected above, and shows that over a 5-year period, based on the assumptions that you've made throughout the pages, that is the amount of cash that you could throw off of this operation. And then to calculate cash flow, You've got cash from operations, which is simply bringing that number down. And then other things, if you do not already have them, fencing, water system, other infrastructure, that's a head gate, some sorting pens, who knows? Less any cost share. And cost share depends on your status, but it's either 75 or 90%. 90% is if you're a first-time farmer, you'd have to ask NRCS, but it's pretty good. And it would cover both fencing and water system. So I said, okay, it's equal to fencing. And by the way, their cost share is for labor and material. If you do your own labor, they still pay you, my understanding, but you better check with NRCS. And then later, as you expand, because of the acres going up, you might want to put in your cash flow some expansion. That's the 3,000 for fencing and the 400 fencing and renovation of land. And these are just my guesses. You know, you'd have to ask somebody, do due diligence on them. And then total cash flow, which is what a banker is looking at, is line 39. The banker said, okay, I'll lend you $25,000 and it'll be a 5-year loan. And that's, in effect, the next line down, accumulated cash flow. In 5 years, you could pay him back, basically. If you put $151 from someplace else in the kitty. So I can't say anything more. That's the tool. And you know, I will say one thing, and this is, you know, these numbers are based on your estimates. If you're already in the cattle business, they're going to be better than if you're not in the cattle business and you just default to what I put in there as or we put in there as an example, which isn't a clever way to do it. It should be what your experience tells you. And by the way, this is where a posse of mentors and helpers and other people comes in handy because they know some of these numbers. Just maybe they're not good accountants, but somebody in their life is, and they know their cost. They should know, if they're serious in the cattle business, they should know their cost of gain and their rate of gain. And those are really key numbers. So I hope that has helped someone, and we can open it up for questions.
Anybody have questions in the room or online?
Okay, I got one. So how often do you review all this information? Because a lot of things change, weather related, how much forage you're going to get, all those kinds of things. How often do you look at this for your business?
I don't look at this for my business. I look at livestock at a version of the other tool that John referred to, Livestock Compass. This tool is meant to do what ifs into the future. And so, yes, things change. And to do this, if I were a banker and somebody brought me this, I would ask exactly the question you asked. The answer is, things do change. Let's see what happens if you mentioned yield. We go back to any one of the cow-calf stocker finishing pages and say, okay, let's say on the downside, we have a drought and my pasture yield is not 4 or 4.3. My pasture yield is going to be 2.5. What does that look like?
So it's more of a forecast tool.
Yeah.
So
This
yeah, I want to step in here, and I think, I mean, this tool was built for people to examine different phases of the cattle industry and figure some things out and make some projections. Jim has been in this for over 50 years, and so he's at a phase of not doing this type of projection, but using our other tool, the Livestock Compass, that is a really detailed look of all your expenses from the previous year, and did you or did you not make money in your various enterprises. So he's just at a stage of his operation where he's using a different tool. It's not that he's not looking or thinking about these things, which is kind of what Jim said, which is not true. He is looking at it and thinking about it. He's just using a different decision support tool.
You change that value in there now. Can you go to that last page and let's see what happens to those final numbers?
Yeah, so that one number was $151 negative, and now it's that. And so, if I were a banker, I would insist that the words would be, okay, that's average, but what's the difference between the lowest you could expect and the highest you could expect on any of these things, on market price, on climate related dry matter yields in pasture or in harvested forage. And I used a very extreme number that you would knock that down by 2.5. Even in drought, if you've been grazing a while, we never took cattle off. We were in D2. That's extreme drought. And I never took cattle off pasture. Now, what happened to me is that I had to quit grazing a little bit about 2 weeks earlier than, so it depends. It's if you're new to grazing, I would suggest that you talk to an NRCS or somebody like that who with some experience, somebody that's been around for a while, and ask them. You Mr. NRCS guy, you calculated my 4 tons per acre. What happens in a dry year? Do you have any experience? And he might say, well, or she might say, you're going to have a 25% reduction in pasture yield, and you're going to have a 25% reduction in hay in a bad year. But you could argue with the banker that in those kind of years that everybody is faced with that, and the price might go up, or everybody's faced with that, and I've got hay stacked away. One of the first guys that did grass-fed beef in Wisconsin, I forget his name. He was up by Rio, someplace. He bought hay for his cow herd in April for the next winter. And the reason he did is because farmers around his place wanted all of their storage facilities virtually empty so that they could put their new crop into those storage facilities. And he was buying hay incredibly cheap. And another guy I know is buying waterway hay and getting it at about $30 a ton. So, to a banker, you could say, I'm not a kindergartner around this. In a bad year, I know how to get a hold of hay. In a bad year, I reduce my stocking rate by selling cattle, or that's the conversation you have with a banker.
Jim, we have
Or
one
with your
other.
spouse.
We have a question from someone in the chat. It says, have you considered adding lines for sale of calves, stockers, or cows at different prices than bulls are sold for, such as breeding stock sales?
John, go to that, the 5-year, yeah. So if you go up here, all the way up to the revenue line, let's see. Direct to customers meat, stockers sold as feeders. Calves born sold as stockers. That's where we accommodate those, I think, 2 of the categories that the question encompassed. Let's see, culls sold, finished animals sold, stockers as feeders, farm-born calves as stockers. Yeah, what we don't have on here, and it just got to the point where it was getting unwieldy. If let's say that you sold bred heifers, that is not included as category here. As a surrogate, you could put in, a bred heifer is about like selling a stocker, or selling a cow, and that is not included in here.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anybody.
You have links to the website?
Yeah, I think there's a folder I dropped in the chat, but then there's also a QR code there. And I can send it out to people afterwards so everyone can have access to getting to the website. But maybe we could give Jim and John a round of applause and thanks.